Capitol last year. Yet, not only were they not punished, those of us that were being threatened and people running after us, we were not protected at all. But Paul and Marilyn, as they were so unfairly and unjustly treated by the FBI and the Department of Justice, the FBI claimed they were looking for Nancy Pelosi's stolen laptop, and they said Marilyn looked like a woman in the Capitol who was a suspect, but the photos that anybody could clearly see, the photos the FBI finally presented eventually, it was clear. That wasn't Marilyn. That wasn't Paul. They didn't take the laptop, yet their freedom was taken from them to teach a lesson. Agents threatened both of Paul and Marilyn Huppers, a teenager that was there. They threatened them with legal recourse. They ransacked their home. They took their cell phones and their computers. They even took a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Wish they would read it and understand it. The Huppers have not been charged with any crime, but more than 400 Americans have been charged with various offenses relating to January 6th. Most face nonviolent trespassing and disorderly conduct charges. But yesterday, the Justice Department announced the arrest of an active duty United States Marine stationed at Quantico for his involvement in the protests that day. Joe Biden's Justice Department is criminalizing political protest, but only political protest by Republicans or conservatives. They're destroying the lives of American families. They're weaponizing the events of January 6th to silence Trump-supporting Americans. You don't have to take our word for it. Michael Sherwin, the acting U.S. attorney who handled the first few months of the Capitol breach probe, bragged that his office arrested at least 100 people between January 6th and January 20th to stop people from coming to D.C. to protest Joe Biden's inauguration. Quote, I wanted to make sure there was shock and awe that we could charge as many people as possible before the 20th, and it worked because we saw through the media posts that people were afraid to come to D.C. because if they go there, we're going to get charged, unquote. That's only part of what's happening. Dozens of Americans have been hauled out of their homes, transported to Washington, D.C., and held in solitary confinement for months, awaiting delayed trials with no end in sight. Nearly all have no criminal record. Some are veterans and ex-law enforcement officers, but the Justice Department is throwing the book at them. Even worse, federal judges and prosecutors argue that these folks are a danger to society because they doubted the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. In one case against a man who didn't even enter the building, a federal judge nonetheless denied bond and said this, quote, this is an offense that at the bottom was an attempt to stop democracy from moving forward because people were unhappy about the results of the election. I don't think the defendant will follow my conditions if he believes I am part of this machine of the democratic process. Well, that judge ought to be part of the Democratic Justice Department because that's how that judge is acting. Not as a judge, but as an advocate, as a part and parcel of this. You could call it a conspiracy because these people are working to silence anybody that supported Donald Trump. But that's one example of how government lawyers and judges are criminalizing someone's belief about the 2020 presidential election. And it's much like the U.S. attorney was saying, you know, they charge enough people, then Trump supporters are not going to be willing to come back out because they know they'll get charged. We have in this city political prisoners held hostage by their own government, victims of an unequal system of justice in a country where rioters and looters on the left are let off the hook, even considered heroes, while those on the right are considered hardened criminals without any record before a trial can even begin. Here's how one defense attorney described the conditions at the D.C. Correctional Treatment Facility. Detainees are held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. They cannot shower or shave regularly. Some have been physically assaulted by prison guards. They cannot play a role in their own defense. They have no regular access to tablets to communicate with their lawyers or family members. In-person meetings with counsel is nearly impossible. Conversations between defendants and lawyers are overheard by other defendants and their lawyers in addition to prison guards. In a detention hearing on May 11th, for the two men accused of using pepper spray against police officers against the late Officer Brian Sicknick, one defense lawyer told the judge he had not been able to speak with his client for 2 weeks. Julian Cater, George Tanios, about whom we were speaking earlier, they were arrested in March for allegedly spraying the officers. They're still being held in D.C. jail for weeks awaiting trial. This week, a federal judge, the one we spoke of earlier, denied bail to both defendants. Julian Cater's family was willing to put up $15 million bond package. Neither man has a criminal record, but you have a judge and a Justice Department with an agenda. And so what these men are getting is not only not bond, but they're getting the most injustice the Department of Justice can throw at them. They never even went inside the building, and the government has yet to prove their case at all. The judge basically tried the case himself this week without either defendant present. Judge Hogan said the men are a danger to society because they attempted to halt the democratic process. Well, if that were a crime, we would have dozens of Democrats with a criminal record for coming in here the first and only time in American history that one party came in, took over the House floor, and prevented a session from taking place. Never happened before, never happened since. Of course, the election didn't go too well for Democrats after that. We had a very weak Speaker of the House at the time who kept saying those people will be punished for their improprieties, for their unethical and unruly behavior. There were at least a dozen or more rules of the House that were violated by Democrats, by most of the Democrats. You're not supposed to sit on the House floor, on the floor itself. You're not supposed to bring food. Heck, food was catered in here. You're not supposed to take pictures in here. There were not only pictures taken, but there was a broadcast going on from the House floor. There were just rule after rule were broken, but there could have potentially been criminal charges, but none were made. None of us filed any criminal charges, even though the insurrectionists in the Democratic Party came in here and prevented the House from doing business for 24 hours. Paul Ryan kept saying he was going to do something about it. He never did.